following story is a translated and adapted conversation, recounting supernatural experiences from around the world. This content is intended for entertainment purposes only. Listen with an open mind and enjoy the thrill of the unknown. The content in this video is purely for entertainment. Viewer discretion is advised. If you are easily frightened, be prepared some stories might just send chills down your spine. If you're ready, turn off the lights, put on your headphones, and immerse yourself in the world of the unexplained. The Mantell UFO incident. The vast blue sky stretched endlessly over Godman Air Force Base in Kentucky. It was January 7, 1948, a day that would etch itself into UFO history. Captain Thomas Mantell, a skilled pilot and World War II veteran, was leading a routine flight exercise in his P-51 Mustang when an urgent call crackled over the radio. Air traffic controllers at Godman reported a strange, unidentified flying object hovering high above. The object was enormous, metallic, and glowing a sight unlike anything they had ever seen. Witnesses on the ground described it as a massive, silver disk, reflecting sunlight as it floated eerily above them. Mantell, along with his squadron, received orders to intercept. They ascended, scanning the sky for the unknown visitor. Reports from the tower guided them toward the object, which seemed to be moving at an incredible speed. As they climbed higher, the pilots struggled to maintain visual contact. Some of Mantell's men, lacking oxygen equipment, had to turn back. But Mantell pressed on, determined to get closer. At 20,000 feet, he radioed back. His voice, steady yet laced with awe, confirmed visual contact. "It's enormous," he said, "metallic. Moving fast to fast, then silence." The tower called out repeatedly, but there was no answer. Minutes later, the worst fears of those listening in were confirmed. Captain Mantell's aircraft had crashed in a rural field near Franklin, Kentucky. His body was found in the wreckage, and chillingly, his watch had stopped at precisely 3:18 p.m., the exact time of his last transmission. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some claimed he had been shot down by an extraterrestrial craft. Others whispered of an unknown force field that had disabled his plane. The official explanation was that Mantell had lost consciousness due to lack of oxygen and his plane had spiraled out of control. But that did little to silence the growing number of conspiracy theories. What exactly had Mantell seen that day? What force had caused his plane to crash so suddenly? As investigators combed through the wreckage, more questions than answers began to emerge. And this was only the beginning of the mystery. Captain Thomas Mantell tightened his grip on the control stick of his P-51 Mustang as he soared through the sky, his eyes locked on the unidentified object ahead. The massive, metallic disc hovered effortlessly, its surface reflecting the afternoon sun like a mirror. The radio crackled with static before a voice from the air traffic control tower inquired, "Captain Mantell, do you have a visual on the object?" "Affirmative," Mantell responded, his voice steady despite the growing tension. "The object is large, metallic, and moving at a high altitude, attempting to close in." As he climbed higher, a strange sensation crept over him. His instruments flickered momentarily, and his altimeter seemed to waver between numbers. The air around him felt unnaturally thick, as if something unseen was pressing against his aircraft. "Sir, you're nearing 20,000 feet, his wingman, Lieutenant Clements, warned. "Maybe we should reconsider pursuit. Our planes aren't equipped with oxygen for these heights." But Mantell was undeterred. His years of experience told him this was something extraordinary, something that couldn't be dismissed. He pushed forward, climbing higher and higher, his eyes fixated on the glowing object that now seemed to pulsate with an eerie blue light. Then, without warning, the object accelerated. In an instant, it darted upward with impossible speed, vanishing from sight. The radio crackled again. "Captain Mantell, do you copy? What just happened?" For several long seconds, silence. Then, a faint, static-laden transmission. "I see it, it's..." Then, nothing. The control tower called out again. "Captain Mantell, respond." No reply. Back on the ground, the radar operators stared in disbelief as Mantell's aircraft began to descend rapidly. Something was wrong. Something had happened up there, and they were about to find out exactly what. Captain Thomas Mantell's cockpit was filled with the sound of rushing wind and the distant hum of his P-51 Mustang's engine. The higher he climbed, the thinner the air became, making every breath a conscious effort. The massive, glowing object remained ahead, moving deliberately, as if it was aware of his pursuit. His radio crackled with static, then a faint voice from the control tower broke through. "Mantell, do you read me? What do you see up there?" He pressed the transmitter button, his voice taut with tension. "It's enormous, metallic, almost like a spinning top. The light is blinding. I'm trying to get closer." Back at Goodman Air Force Base, the officers listening to Mantell's transmission exchanged anxious glances. The object he described was unlike anything they had ever encountered. The radio went silent for a moment, and then a sudden burst of static erupted. "I'm losing control." The light hits, then nothing. At the base, Lieutenant Colonel E.G. White called out, "Mantell, respond." "Are you still in pursuit?" The only answer was silence. Seconds dragged into minutes, and the tension in the control room thickened. Mantell's aircraft continued to ascend, his oxygen supply dwindling. The last thing he saw was a sudden, pulsating light engulfing the sky around him. His fingers clenched the controls, but an overwhelming force seemed to pull the aircraft forward. He struggled against it, but his vision blurred. A deep humming sound vibrated through his cockpit, pressing against his skull. Then, everything faded to black. On the ground, radar operators tracked Mantell's aircraft until the blip on the screen suddenly disappeared. Moments later, reports came in from civilians miles away. A fiery streak was seen plummeting from the sky. Emergency response teams were dispatched immediately. Hours later, search crews found the wreckage of Mantell's aircraft scattered across a Kentucky field. The damage was extensive, yet oddly specific: no signs of an explosion, no fuel leakage. And most unsettling of all, Mantell's body was found still strapped into the seat, but his wristwatch had stopped precisely at the moment he lost contact with the base. The military scrambled to piece together what had happened. Officials quickly attributed the crash to pilot error or hypoxia, but many who listened to Mantell's final transmission were not convinced. Some whispered theories of extraterrestrial contact, while others speculated about a government cover-up. As night fell over the airbase, the men who had listened to Mantell's last words sat in silence, haunted by the mystery. What had he really seen up there? And, more chillingly, was it still out there, watching? The icy wind howled through the Kentucky sky as Air National Guard Captain Thomas Mantell pushed his P-51 Mustang to its limits. His hands gripped the controls tightly, his eyes locked onto the gleaming unidentified object floating high above him. The silver disc shimmered in the afternoon light, hovering effortlessly, seemingly taunting him to follow. The radio crackled as his squad mates called out to him, urging him to turn back. But Mantell refused. "I can almost reach it," he murmured, sweat beading at his brow. The altitude alarm wailed. He was going too high, past the limits of his oxygen supply. His vision blurred, his breathing grew ragged, but still, he climbed. And then darkness. Meanwhile, on the ground, witnesses watched in horror as his aircraft spiraled downward, crashing into a field in a fiery explosion. When the wreckage was recovered, there were no signs of a parachute, no last-minute escape. Just shattered metal and the eerie, lingering presence of something beyond comprehension. Authorities quickly offered explanations: Venus, a weather balloon, pilot error, but those who saw the object that day knew better. The government reports were swift, but whispers of the truth lingered. Captain Mantell had chased something not of this world, and it had cost him his life. As night fell, the townspeople who had witnessed the encounter found themselves staring at the sky, wondering if whatever had lured Captain Mantell to his fate was still watching, waiting. The wreckage of Captain Mantell's aircraft lay scattered across the open field, a grim reminder of his final moments. Investigators from the Air Force combed through the debris, searching for any clue that could explain the mysterious circumstances of the crash. Yet, nothing seemed out of place: no signs of an explosion, no mechanical failures, and no distress signals sent before impact. The official explanation would soon follow, but those closest to the case knew that something was being hidden. Meanwhile, witnesses from the ground continued to speak out. Some claimed they saw Mantell's plane spiral downward after a bright flash in the sky, while others reported hearing a deep humming noise moments before the crash. The most chilling accounts came from local farmers who insisted they saw a massive, metallic disc hovering above the site, disappearing just as the wreckage hit the ground. Back at the airbase, Mantel's fellow pilots were shaken. They had flown with him for years, trusted his skills, and knew he was not one to take reckless risks. But the official report claimed he had been chasing Venus or a high-altitude weather balloon, and that lack of oxygen at high altitudes had caused him to black out. To many, this explanation felt forced, an attempt to silence the growing unease. As days passed, rumors of classified documents and secret briefings spread among military personnel. Some whispered about intercepted radio transmissions from Mantel's cockpit, recordings that were never made public. Others claimed that Air Force intelligence had confiscated key pieces of the wreckage before independent investigators could examine them. What exactly had Mantel encountered that day? Was it a top-secret military experiment gone wrong, an unknown atmospheric phenomenon? Or, as some began to suspect, had he made contact with something not of this world? The more questions arose, the more the truth seemed to slip further away. The Mantel UFO incident would go down in history as one of the first military encounters with an unidentified flying object, a case that set the stage for decades of UFO investigations and government secrecy. But for those who had known Mantel personally, one truth remained undeniable: he had died chasing something extraordinary, something beyond human understanding. As night fell over the airbase, another sighting was reported. A glowing orb, hovering in the distance, flickering in and out of view. Perhaps, whatever Mantel had been chasing was still watching. Captain Thomas Mantel's aircraft spun uncontrollably towards the Earth, the once bright sky now a blur of colors and chaos. The strange, glowing object that he had pursued mere moments ago had vanished, leaving him alone in the vast expanse of the heavens, with his plane in freefall. The last transmission from Mantel had been fragmented, riddled with interference. His last words had sent chills through the operators at the airbase. "It's enormous, I can't get close enough, my God." Then, silence. On the ground, radar operators and fellow pilots watched in horror as Mantel's plane plummeted. There was no sign of the mysterious object, no evidence left in the sky. Moments later, an earth-shaking explosion signified that his aircraft had struck the ground. A search party was dispatched immediately to the crash site, deep in the Kentucky countryside. When they arrived, the wreckage was unlike anything they had expected. The fuselage was torn apart, as if some great force had wrenched it open from the inside. The metal showed signs of intense heat, almost as though it had been melted in places. And most chilling of all, there was no sign of Mantel's body. Investigators scoured the area, but there was no trace of the pilot. No remains, no evidence of ejection. It was as if he had simply vanished before the crash. Rumors spread quickly: was he abducted in midair? Had the unknown craft somehow taken him, or was something even stranger at play? The official report stated that Captain Mantel had succumbed to hypoxia, lack of oxygen, after climbing too high without a pressurized suit. According to the military, he had lost consciousness, and his aircraft spiraled out of control. However, skeptics found this explanation too convenient. The nature of the wreckage, the bizarre radio transmission, and the sheer mystery of the glowing object suggested that something else had happened that day. In the years that followed, the Mantel UFO incident remained one of the most perplexing cases in aviation history. Was it a classified military experiment? A genuine encounter with extraterrestrial technology, or something else entirely? To this day, Captain Mantel's final words echo through history, leaving us with more questions than answers. My God. The Lubbock Lights. The night sky over Lubbock, Texas, was usually clear and calm. On an evening in August 1951, however, something extraordinary disrupted the peace. It began with a small group of professors from Texas Tech University who were enjoying a quiet night outside when they noticed something unusual. A formation of glowing orbs, bluish-white in color, moved silently across the sky in a perfect arc. Confused and intrigued, they quickly ruled out any conventional explanations. These were not meteors, nor were they reflections or aircraft. The lights moved in unison with a precision that defied logic. They were unlike anything seen before. Word of the strange sighting spread quickly. Soon, dozens of residents reported witnessing the same phenomenon. Witnesses described the lights as being arranged in a crescent shape, moving in synchronized patterns, sometimes appearing and reappearing as if performing a calculated display. The event repeated on multiple nights, drawing more and more attention. Among those captivated by the Lubbock lights was a young college student, Carl Hart Jr., who managed to capture several photographs of the strange formations. His images, later published in newspapers across the country, added fuel to the growing speculation about what exactly was unfolding in the Texas sky. Were these lights proof of extraterrestrial visitors, or was there a more rational, earthly explanation? As the sightings continued, fear and excitement gripped the town. The U.S. Air Force took an interest, launching an investigation under Project Blue Book. Despite their efforts, no definitive answer was found. Some scientists speculated that the lights could have been a flock of birds illuminated by streetlights, but this explanation did little to satisfy those who had witnessed the event firsthand. As the mystery deepened, so did the paranoia. If the lights were not from this world, then what did they mean? What or who was watching the small town of Lubbock from above? The questions would remain unanswered, but the legend of the Lubbock lights had just begun. The sightings of the strange lights over Lubbock, Texas, continued for several nights, with more and more residents coming forward with their own eerie experiences. Scientists, professors, and even military personnel began investigating the phenomenon, but no clear explanation emerged. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some believed it was an experimental government aircraft, while others were convinced it was of extraterrestrial origin. Among those captivated by the mystery was Dr. William Evans, a professor of astronomy at Texas Tech University. He gathered reports from witnesses, carefully documenting their descriptions. Many described the lights as a perfectly symmetrical formation, moving at an incredible speed, silent but awe-inspiring. No known aircraft could perform such precise maneuvers. Meanwhile, Paul and his friends, who had first spotted the lights while stargazing, felt an unsettling sense of paranoia growing within them. Every night, they returned to the rooftop, hoping to catch another glimpse. When the lights reappeared, Paul decided to take action. Armed with an old camera, he snapped several photographs, hoping to capture proof of what they were seeing. The images would soon become some of the most famous UFO photographs ever taken, but they would also draw unwanted attention. Government officials arrived in Lubbock within days, questioning witnesses and confiscating evidence. The military offered a vague explanation, possibly migratory birds reflecting city lights, but few accepted this theory. The more Paul investigated, the more he felt that something was being hidden. He started noticing unfamiliar cars parked near his house and strange clicks on his telephone line. Then, one night, the lights returned, but this time, something was different. As Paul and his friends watched, a shadowy figure stood in the distance, barely visible against the night sky. It was watching them, and when Paul blinked, it was gone. Something, or someone, didn't want them to uncover the truth. The days following the Lubbock lights sighting were filled with tension and speculation. Reports flooded in from all across Texas, as more people claimed to have seen the strange formation in the sky. The witnesses ranged from college professors to ordinary townsfolk, all describing the same eerie arc of glowing orbs. Dr. William Hathaway, an astrophysics professor at Texas Tech University, became particularly invested in uncovering the truth. With the help of his colleagues, he set up observation equipment and began recording the night sky, hoping to capture another sighting. However, what he discovered unsettled him even more: unusual interference in radio signals, magnetic fluctuations, and, most disturbingly, a pattern in the way the lights appeared. Meanwhile, some residents reported experiencing strange phenomena beyond just the lights. Electrical appliances malfunctioned, animals acted erratically, and a few individuals even claimed to have experienced time loss. One woman, Mrs. Eleanor Carter, swore she had been driving home the night of the sighting when she suddenly found herself an hour away from her original location with no memory of how she got there. As Dr. Hathaway and his team analyzed photographic evidence, they found something unexpected: a set of images captured from different angles, showing the lights forming an almost perfect geometric shape. This suggested something intelligent was behind their movement. However, before they could publicize their findings, two men in dark suits arrived at the university, confiscated their research, and warned them not to pursue the matter further. Determined not to be silenced, Dr. Hathaway secretly kept copies of his research, but the deeper he dug, the more he realized that this mystery was far beyond what he had ever imagined. The Lubbock Lights were no ordinary aerial phenomenon, and perhaps something was determined to keep it that way. The following night, the Lubbock Lights returned, this time more witnesses gathering to catch a glimpse of the strange phenomenon. Dr. Robinson, skeptical yet intrigued, set up a small telescope on his front porch. His neighbors, the Millers, joined him, eager to see if the lights would appear again. As the evening stretched on, a hush fell over the small crowd. Then, as if on cue, the lights reappeared, bright orbs forming a perfect semicircle, gliding soundlessly across the night sky. The gathered spectators gasped, some snapped photographs, others stood frozen in awe. Young Tommy Miller, clutching his father's hand, whispered, "They're watching us." Dr. Robinson jotted down notes feverishly, determined to make sense of the event. Could it be military aircraft? A rare atmospheric phenomenon, or something else entirely? Meanwhile, across town, a radio broadcast interrupted the regular programming to report multiple sightings of the mysterious lights. Callers from various neighborhoods described the same formation, some claiming the lights moved in synchrony, like they were under intelligent control. As Dr. Robinson watched through his telescope, a cold dread settled over him. The lights weren't merely drifting, they were maneuvering, responding, as if aware of being observed. Just as suddenly as they had appeared, the lights vanished, leaving behind only the quiet hum of crickets and the unnerving realization that something inexplicable had just transpired. The Lubbock Lights. The following evening, as Dr. Robbins pored over his notes in his dimly lit study, he received an unexpected call. It was from an Air Force officer stationed at the nearby base. The officer, speaking in a hushed tone, asked Robbins to meet him in a discreet location. Intrigued and slightly apprehensive, Robbins agreed. At an isolated roadside diner outside of town, Robbins met with the officer, a man named Captain Hughes. The captain's face was tense, his fingers drumming nervously on the table as he spoke. "Professor, you need to stop looking into the Lubbock Lights," Hughes warned. "You're not the only one interested in this phenomenon. There are people who don't want certain truths to come out." Robbins leaned in. "Are you saying the military knows what those lights were?" Hughes hesitated before responding. "I'm saying that when things appear in the sky that can't be explained, people in power want to keep it that way." Before Robbins could press for more information, Hughes abruptly stood up, dropped a few bills on the table, and walked out into the night. Robbins sat there, heart pounding, realizing he might have stumbled onto something much larger than he had ever anticipated. Meanwhile, back in Lubbock, Emma and Jason, two local teenagers fascinated by the phenomenon, had decided to take their own approach. Armed with a camera, they sneaked out to the same field where the lights had been spotted. The night was eerily silent, with only the hum of distant traffic in the air. As they waited, scanning the sky, Jason suddenly gasped and pointed. Above them, the lights returned. This time, they weren't just streaking across the sky. They hovered. They moved in perfect synchronization, shifting in ways no conventional aircraft ever could. The lights pulsed softly, as if responding to some unseen signal. Jason fumbled for the camera, his hands shaking. "We have to get this on tape," he whispered. As the shutter clicked, a high-pitched hum filled the air. Emma felt her skin prickle with static electricity. The lights shifted, suddenly accelerating toward them with unnatural speed. Jason grabbed Emma's hand. "Run." The two sprinted back toward their car, but before they could reach it, a blinding light engulfed them, and the world around them seemed to dissolve into nothingness. Back at his study, Dr. Robbins stared out his window, the warning from Captain Hughes echoing in his mind. He had dedicated his life to seeking knowledge, but for the first time, he wondered if some truths were meant to stay hidden. Unbeknownst to him, two local teens had just disappeared without a trace. The night was thick with an eerie silence as Dr. Caldwell and his team stood atop the observation deck, their eyes locked onto the mysterious lights that had plagued Lubbock for weeks. The pattern of the luminous orbs was different tonight, more erratic, more purposeful. It was as if they were responding to the watchers below. Agent Harris tightened his grip on the radio. "Base, this is Harris. We've got significant movement. Do you copy?" Static filled the airwaves before a garbled voice responded. "Harris, proceed with caution. High energy readings detected." A chill ran through the group as the largest orb descended lower, illuminating the treetops with a spectral glow. Suddenly, a piercing frequency erupted from the direction of the lights. Dr. Caldwell and several others fell to their knees, clutching their heads as the sound rattled deep into their bones. And then, silence. The orbs had vanished, leaving behind a residual energy that vibrated through the air. The team staggered to their feet, shaken but unharmed. Harris turned to Caldwell. "What just happened?" The doctor exhaled sharply. "I think they communicated." "Communicated? With who?" Agent Harris demanded. "Communicated? With who?" Agent Harris demanded. A week later, a farmer found a strange metallic object embedded in his field, its surface covered in unfamiliar symbols. The object pulsed faintly, emitting the same frequency that had incapacitated the research team that fateful night. The government moved in swiftly, confiscating the object and classifying all findings. The official report on the Lubbock lights remained inconclusive. But for those who had witnessed it firsthand, there was no doubt. The Lubbock lights were not just an anomaly. They were a message, and somewhere out there, whoever or whatever sent them was still watching. The Broadhaven UFO sightings. The year was 1977, and the small coastal village of Broadhaven, Wales, was about to become the center of one of the most mysterious UFO encounters in British history. Nestled along the Pembrokeshire coast, Broadhaven was a quiet place where nothing out of the ordinary ever happened until a group of young schoolchildren claimed to have seen something that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. It was a crisp February afternoon when a group of students at Broadhaven Primary School were playing outside during lunch break. The wind carried the scent of the sea, and the sky was painted in hues of gray. Among the children was 10-year-old David Davies, an observant and curious boy who would later become one of the main voices recounting the strange event. As they ran across the playground, a metallic glint in the distance caught their attention. At first, they thought it was nothing more than a trick of the light, but as they focused, they could see it clearly as silver, disc-shaped craft, hovering near the trees just beyond the schoolyard. The children gasped in awe and fear. Some of them thought it was an airplane, but there was something unsettling about the way it hovered motionlessly before descending behind a row of trees. Then, out of the eerie silence, came a figure. It was tall, much taller than any human they had ever seen, dressed in a silver suit, its head encased in a helmet that gleamed under the overcast sky. The figure moved unnaturally, as if gliding rather than walking, and the children swore they could feel an intense, unseen presence watching them. Panic set in. The children screamed, running back toward the school, their voices a chaotic chorus of fear and confusion. They burst into the classroom, gasping for breath, trying to explain what they had just witnessed. Their teacher, thinking it was just a case of overactive imaginations, dismissed their claims. But the children were adamant. They described the craft and the figure with such eerie consistency that the headmaster decided to take action. In an attempt to find the truth, the headmaster separated the students and asked them to draw what they had seen. The results were chilling. Each drawing depicted the same object, a large, metallic saucer and a humanoid figure in a silver suit. The incident didn't end there. The next day, whispers spread through the village. Some adults came forward, claiming they had also seen strange lights in the sky the night before. The local media caught wind of the story, and soon UFO investigators arrived in Broadhaven, eager to uncover what had truly happened that fateful day. As night fell over the village, a sense of unease settled among the residents. Was it just the imagination of children running wild? Or had Broadhaven been visited by something not of this earth? Little did they know, this was only the beginning. The schoolyard was eerily silent the next morning. Whispers spread like wildfire among the students, each child recounting their own version of the strange sighting from the day before. Some spoke of a hovering silver craft, others of a towering figure with glowing eyes. None of them could forget the feeling, the inexplicable sense that they had been watched. Mrs. Jenkins, their teacher, was skeptical at first. She had heard children tell tall tales before. But when nearly 15 students came forward, each with a strikingly similar description of the event, she grew uneasy. It wasn't just imagination running wild. Something had happened. Determined to put an end to the hysteria, the school principal contacted the authorities. A small group of local officials and one investigator from the military were dispatched to the site. They walked the school grounds, their eyes scanning for anything unusual, but nothing seemed out of place. Then, a discovery was made: a circular patch of scorched grass behind the playground. The grass, normally lush and green, was now a deadened brown, as if something had seared it from above. The investigator knelt, brushing his fingers against the brittle remains. A frown creased his face, but he said nothing. By that afternoon, the entire town was talking. Parents, at first dismissive, began to wonder if their children had really seen something extraordinary. The local newspaper caught wind of the story, and soon reporters arrived, eager to hear first-hand accounts. One by one, the students recounted the same details: an oval-shaped craft, a pulsing blue light, and the fleeting image of a tall, humanoid figure standing beside it. Despite the mounting evidence, skeptics dismissed the claims as mere childhood fantasy. But then, another witness came forward. Mr. Hughes, a farmer whose land bordered the school, claimed to have seen a brilliant flash of light in the sky the previous evening. It wasn't a shooting star, he insisted. It was something else, something unnatural. As night fell over Broadhaven once again, a sense of unease settled over the town. Whatever had visited them the night before, if it had truly been something from beyond, could still be out there, watching from the shadows. The small town of Broadhaven was no stranger to whispers and tales, but what happened that fateful day at the schoolyard had sent shockwaves through the community. As more reports surfaced, this time from locals who swore they had seen strange lights in the sky the night before, the incident could no longer be dismissed as a child's fantasy. The headmaster of the school, Mr. Jenkins, was overwhelmed by the attention. Journalists had begun to flood the area, eager to interview the students who claimed to have seen the UFO. But as he gathered the children separately and asked them to draw what they had seen, a chill ran down his spine. The sketches were eerily similar: an oval-shaped craft, metallic, with glowing lights. Some of the children had even drawn the strange figure they saw, towering over 6 feet with dark, piercing eyes. Rumors reached the local authorities, and soon, a team from the Ministry of Defense arrived. Though they didn't confirm or deny anything, they questioned the children, the teachers, and even nearby farmers who had their own accounts of strange occurrences. One such farmer, Mr. Evans, reported that his sheep had been acting strangely for weeks, and that, on the night of the sighting, he had seen an object hovering over the fields before vanishing into the clouds. Meanwhile, the students began to feel the weight of their experience. Some of them complained of restless sleep, hearing a faint humming sound at night, while others reported seeing flickering lights outside their windows. One boy, Daniel, confided in his parents that he had seen the figure again, this time standing at the edge of the woods behind his house. Fear and curiosity gripped Broadhaven. Was this truly an encounter with beings from another world? Or was there something else at play, something beyond their comprehension? As the investigation continued, the truth remained just beyond their reach, hidden in the darkness that had settled over the town. The following morning, the small town of Broadhaven was abuzz with hushed conversations and nervous glances. The children who had witnessed the strange craft behind their school had been interviewed separately by their teachers, each of them recounting eerily similar details. The sight of a large, metallic object hovering silently, the tall, humanoid figure clad in silver, and the unsettling sensation that they were being watched. Local authorities were skeptical. The headmaster, Mr. Williams, tried to dismiss it as childish imagination, but when the children were asked to sketch what they saw, their drawings were nearly identical. The news spread quickly, reaching the ears of local journalists who were eager to uncover the truth behind the mystery. Meanwhile, in a farmhouse just outside the village, a couple, Gareth and Ellen Davies, had their own chilling encounter. The previous night, their sheepdog had been barking furiously at something in the fields. When Gareth went outside with a flashlight, he saw strange lights hovering above the trees. A low, humming sound filled the air, making the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. He called for Ellen, but before she could step outside, the lights shot off into the night sky, disappearing in an instant. Word of Gareth's encounter only fueled the growing fear in Broadhaven. The events could no longer be ignored. Soon, government officials arrived, claiming to be conducting an investigation. They took statements from the children, the Davies family, and other residents who had reported unusual activity. However, their findings were never publicly disclosed, leaving the town with more questions than answers. As the days passed, more strange occurrences were reported. Flickering lights were seen in the sky, livestock began behaving strangely, and radios suffered from bouts of static interference. It seemed as though whatever had visited Broadhaven was not yet done with the small Welsh town. But what did it want? And, more importantly, would it return? The village of Broadhaven had become a center of speculation, a place where whispers of extraterrestrial encounters grew louder with each passing day. The group of students who had first reported the sighting were no longer alone in their experiences. More locals, including teachers and parents, began sharing their own unsettling encounters. Lights hovering over fields, tall shadowy figures glimpsed at the edges of the woods. There was no denying that something strange was happening. One evening, a local farmer named Gareth Evans was closing up his barn when he noticed a pulsating glow emanating from the hills beyond his property. At first, he dismissed it as headlights from a distant car, but then the lights moved in an impossible pattern, zipping from side to side and then shooting straight up into the sky. His cattle grew restless, their nervous braying filling the night air. Appeared, the light vanished. Gareth would have convinced himself it was all a trick of the mind if not for the scorched circle of grass he found in his field the next morning. At the same time, the students from the school were still plagued by nightmares. Many of them described eerily similar dreams of tall, silver-clad figures standing at the foot of their beds, staring at them with large, black eyes. One of the teachers, Miss Rowland, had initially been skeptical of the children's claims, but after experiencing an unexplainable power outage in her home, one that left her TV flickering with static and her radio whispering distorted voices, she began to reconsider. Then came the most shocking event yet. A fisherman who had been out late one night along the Pembrokeshire coast swore he saw something emerge from the water, a metallic craft, partially submerged, lifting itself into the sky. The glow of its underbelly reflected off the waves before it sped off at a speed no human-made aircraft could match. The government had already sent investigators, but their findings were inconclusive, and many suspected a cover-up. Locals whispered that RAF Brodie, the nearby military base, knew more than they were letting on. But with no solid evidence, the mystery remained just that, a mystery. As the days passed, the sense of unease deepened. Something had visited Broadhaven, something beyond human understanding. But the question remained, would it return? The air inside the small farmhouse was thick with tension. The investigators, now joined by a few skeptical journalists, had set up recording devices, hoping to capture any sign of the strange occurrences reported by the children and villagers alike. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the windows, making the shadows stretch unnaturally against the walls. Then, at precisely 17 a.m., a loud humming noise filled the air. The journalists exchanged uneasy glances. The sound was low but intense, vibrating through the floorboards. Then, the power cut out. A few gasps filled the darkness. One of the investigators reached for a flashlight, but before he could switch it on, the humming grew louder, almost deafening. Outside, a bright, pulsating light illuminated the fields beyond the farmhouse. It flickered in an unnatural rhythm, casting the trees in eerie silhouettes. The group rushed to the window, peering out into the night. Standing near the tree line was a tall, shadowy figure moving, watching. A journalist, emboldened by curiosity, grabbed a camera and darted outside, ignoring the frantic warnings of the others. The moment his feet touched the cold, damp grass, the light flickered again, and the figure disappeared as if it had never been there. Then, an ear-piercing static rang through the air. The journalists and investigators inside clutched their ears, wincing in pain. The man outside froze, his camera falling to the ground with a dull thud. He stood there, unblinking, eyes wide with terror. Moments later, the lights returned, and the strange noise ceased. The group rushed outside to the journalist, who stood trembling. His face was pale, his breath uneven. "They spoke to me," he whispered, voice shaking. "Not with words, but in my mind. They told me it's not over. They're still watching, always watching." He collapsed into their arms, unconscious. The camera lay at their feet, lens shattered, the footage lost forever. The Broadhaven sightings never stopped. Decades later, those who were there still recall the strange lights, the shadowy figures, and the overwhelming sense that something beyond human understanding had touched their small village. And as for the journalist, he never spoke of that night again.
If you enjoyed today's story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel, Mystical Tales, so you won't miss out on more eerie and thrilling tales in the future. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.